In this video, we'll introduce working with files and datasets in the distributed file system HopsFS, which is part of the Hopsworks platform. So firstly, we're going to log in with the admin username and admin password, and we're going to work with a project called Demo Deep Learning. And this Demo Deep Learning project was created by running the tour on the left-hand side. And after we ran the tour, it created this project. And this project will include all the data that we need for this particular video. So now I'm going to go into the project Demo Deep Learning. And we'll see on the left-hand side there's a number of different services. In particular, we're going to look at the Dataset service, which contains the basic datasets that were created when you created the project. But we're going to start by looking first at the settings to see that there is in fact a quota associated with this project. So every project has a quota, and we have a quota in terms of the number of files that you can create, but also the amount of storage you're allowed to use. There is also a CPU quota, which tells you how many CPU hours you can use, and GPUs are typically a constant factor of the number of CPU hours. So typically that might be 10 or 100 times the price of one CPU hour, depending on whether you're buying expensive NVIDIA or inexpensive NVIDIA cards. Now, if we want to change that quota here, we can go to the admin UI, and we can go to the project management up here, and in here we can edit then you can go back and edit then the quota for that given project. So let's go back in here. We look in our Datasets service now, and in here we can see that there's been a number of datasets that were created when we created the project. We won't talk about this test job dataset, that's specific to this Demo Deep Learning project, but we'll start by looking at the experiments dataset. This particular dataset stores the outcomes and outputs of experiments in TensorFlow, PySpark, PyTorch, typically deep learning applications. It will contain information such as the TensorBoard logs. You'll have the logs of some of your applications. And the next one we'll look at is Jupyter. This contains your Jupyter notebooks. So the Jupyter notebooks are actually stored in HDFS or HopsFS. That means they're available by all users in the project. So if you edit your Jupyter notebook here, another user who logs in will also have access to that Jupyter notebook. The next dataset is logs. In this particular dataset, we store the output of jobs that are run up here, so Yarn applications. And in the next dataset, we have models. And in this case, we store models that are saved from TensorFlow, for example, will be made available here. The directory structure will be the name of the model and its version number, and inside there you'll have the contents of the model. So if it's scikit-learn, it'll be a pickled Python file, and if it's TensorFlow, it'll be a protocol buffer file with some index files. And the last dataset we'll look at here is called resources. This is typically where you place your programs or other files that you may need, and it has a special function in that there are two roles for users in the platform: data scientists and data owners. And data scientists have less privileges. They're not typically allowed to create data sets, so they're not allowed to press this button to create a data set, and they're typically not allowed to delete data sets, copy data out of this project or into the project, with the exception of maybe programs they develop outside the project. So if they write a program in Scala and compile it into a jar file, or in Java and compile it into a jar file, or a Python program, they can upload it always to this resources folder up here. So in this case, you can see I've just started uploading Tiny ImageNet, which is quite a large data set, and it's a zip file, and in fact I clicked on it earlier on and pressed unzip. I think it's over 120,000 files, and they're quite small files, so we'll let that continue there. And what we can see is we can also create a new data set. So let's create one. We'll call it Google. Great name. And This data set now it can be treated as a subtree in our file system. We can upload data to it. So we can just upload this little video here. And datasets, as I mentioned already, are first-class entities. So I can make this dataset available within the whole cluster by making it public. So if I share it with the whole cluster, it's equivalent of making it public. And we'll do that. And now when we go back to our main landing page and we look at cluster datasets, we'll see that this Google dataset's available, and anybody else who wants to access it can add it to their project. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to create a new project. We're going to call it Logical Clocks. And I selected all of the services by default. You can also write a description in here, which will also get indexed. So when you search for the project or dataset, this description will also be indexed in free text. It takes a couple of seconds to create the project. There, it's done. And if we go back to our cluster datasets, we can take this Google dataset and now we can share it with or add it to our Logical Clocks project. We've done that. And now in the Logical Clocks project, if we go to datasets, we'll see that this Google dataset will appear in here. And in fact, it appears in here under the name Demo Deep Learning Google. So we now have access to this particular video file here. Now, because I don't own this particular dataset, it's owned by the Demo Deep Learning project, if I try and upload some data to it, it's trying twice. And it says it's not editable. So that means I'm not allowed to actually upload data to that data set. Okay. So let's have a quick look at how we use files in the in this file system. So if we have a Jupyter notebook, for example, we have lots of Jupyter notebooks here. Well, let's take an actual data file. So in test job, we have some data files. And we can go into, for example, census data. Now this particular file is found in the datasets test job dataset of the Demo Deep Learning project in a subfolder called Data Census, but the full path we can get and copy onto our clipboard by just pressing this button here. So if you select your file and press on the Copy HDFS Path button, you will get access to it. You'll notice there's a lot more buttons up here that you can use to copy files, move files, edit file names, delete files, download files if you have the privilege to do it, and even preview file if that data format is previewable. So for example, these are TF record files, they're not exactly viewable. I think the RS data is CSV, so we should be able to just preview that. And we can see there's some data that you can preview images and text files typically. Okay, let's look at working with HDFS data in a Python notebook. So I'm going to go to the Jupyter notebook now, click on experiment, and we're just going to start up a Jupyter notebook. Now this is again in the demo project, so, and you can see this is the first time I've actually run this, so I'm going to just allow pop-ups from this particular domain. And I'm going to go to this particular folder here called File System. And in the file system, we can see it says HopsFS Operations Notebook. So if we look at this notebook, it shows us how to use HopsFS from the Python API. So we can just call from hops import HDFS. We can get the path to our project by calling hdfs.projectPath. We can also get our username specific to this project, or the name of the project, by calling hdfs.projectUser and hdfs.project_name. We can read and write to HDFS. In this case, let's run some of this code here. So this is a PySpark notebook. You could also run this from a Python notebook, I believe. So let's just start running some of this. It's going to start our Spark application. And if we go down through the notebook, we can see there's some more code from copying to your local file system to HDFS. So each project will have its own private staging directory. So if we copy to local from HDFS, we need to make sure we have enough space on that staging directory on the same machine as the Hopsworks server. But once we've copied the file to the local directory, we can also open those files with standard Python commands like with open. And you can see we have more operations to move files, list files in directories, change owner, and test if files exist, and so on. So let's just run a couple of these. We run those, and then we'll just run this one, which is basically going to read in a README, and then it's printing out the contents of that README to the screen. So it's very simple. In this example, it's going to open a file called text.txt, and it's going to copy it to HDFS to the resources folder. So what we can do is we can now look in the resources folder back in Hopsworks, see if that file appears. And we can see there's test.txt here. And there it is here. Okay. So with that, we conclude the brief introduction to using HDFS in Hopsworks.